So we have time for just one more question, and I think this is a perfect one to end on. Several of you have attested to the resilience and the positive attitudes of the Japanese people during this horrific time. You've stated that this experience would be a learning lesson for the American people. What lesson would you like the American people to learn and understand so that this history doesn't get repeated?
The big question. Of course, right now we're all sensitive to discrimination and how awful it can be in making decisions and acting on a person's personal discriminatory attitude towards people. And we all know that it's wrong to make judgments just purely on a person's physical appearance and what their culture might be or other things that really don't really make a person eligible to be persecuted. And in our case as Japanese Americans, it was probably more ignorance than real discrimination, in the sense that most of the Japanese lived out here in the West Coast and mostly in California, and so people back east knew very little about Japanese people. So I'm not sure what they thought and what they may have contributed in the sense of what actually happened during the war for us, but it's I guess the lesson for, well, it couldn't happen again, I don't think, in the sense that there are a lot of counter forces for doing what was done to us during World War II. But nevertheless, other variations of the same kind of attitude and action could happen again. And so hopefully we can bring these out when a situation comes up, and that we can counteract any attitudes or actions to against those kinds of attitudes or those kinds of feelings of one another.
Well said, cousin. I like that. But I think the main thing is education. Exactly what these young people are doing here right now is spreading what happened, and we hope we learn from the past so it doesn't happen again in the future.
Right now, how are they going to do that? There's been so many mixed marriages, so they can't say, okay, you're Asian, you're black, you're white. So now it's going to be very, very hard, and I hope it never happens again.
Right after the war, my father wrote many letters and got out, and we went to Milwaukee. And my parents believed firmly that the place that was the most important place in the world, where all the answers would be in school. So they got there at 4:30 one afternoon, 8 o'clock the next morning, they were at the school getting us registered. And that's what they believed. By the next day, my sister and I were going hand in hand, walking down to the school. They said, you'll be safe there. Education is absolutely the answer. I so appreciate Tim Heyer being here today, and my superintendent. Appreciate his presence here. He's been a great leader. But anyway, education is the answer. And when I went there, went to my room, and my sister's holding my hand, and she's more scared than I am. But instead of the welcome that I thought I was going to get, all these children were lined up. We had to walk through this corridor, and they're making these Chinese eyes or these eyes, Japanese eyes, and saying, you like rice, and doing all this ching-chang, chong-chong. And so you just have to walk through this. And I was in such a shock. And I got to the room, and I remember that there was a door and there was a window there. And when I looked back, I could just see a sea of faces, making faces at me and sticking their tongues out at me. And the teacher was just at her desk writing, didn't seem to notice. She said, "Are you the new girl?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "That's where you sit, so sit down right there." I went and I sat down. The door opened and all the kids were coming around, but they were like, "Ooh, she has cooties, don't sit by her." They were trying to sit double so they couldn't sit by me. And they were saying about these planes and where was my buck teeth, and all these things were going on. The teacher paid not attention. She was up there getting rolled, and then she said, "Okay, we're gonna have roll call." She said, "Okay, when I call your name, answer please." She said, "Nancy," and I said, "Here," and she said, "We say present." So I said, "Present." So then and then we went on, she called the rest of the roll. The children were snickering and laughing. So then, in a few minutes, she said, "Nancy, come up here, come stand up here." So I went up to the front of the room and I stood there. And if she had said, "Okay, take off your clothes," I would have taken my clothes off. I mean, just like that, you know, education and the teacher, the room, the classroom was absolute in my family. And instead she said, "Okay, Ruth, come up here. Susan, Joan, Richard, Joseph." She called all these people up there until there was a big line of kids right next to me. And then she said, "Okay, Joan, go stand next to Nancy. Put your heads together." She found someone with black hair. She said, "How are their hair different? What color are they? Both black?" "Yes." "Okay. Joseph, come up here. Hold up your hand. How many fingers does he have? How many fingers does she have? Does he have 5? Does she have 5? She went through this step by step, attribute by attribute, and it was a quick, I called it the quick, perfect lesson. And then she just said very matter-of-factly, "We have been so rude to Nancy. I wouldn't forgive her if I were her. But maybe if you're nice enough, maybe she will forgive you. I've met her parents, they're wonderful, they've got things to share with you. So perhaps you can be kind enough or she will forgive you. Now, get out your math books." And I'm telling you, this teacher changed my life from being a point of ridicule to, I mean, they wanted to show me the bathroom, they wanted to show me where the merry-go-round, they wanted to show me where they all sat and had lunch. One teacher in one room being so sensitive and just doing it so matter-of-factly that I just want to tell you that one person can make a difference. One person can absolutely make a difference. And I think the people pulling together, their steadfastness, their patriotism, you know, my parents came back without demonstrations, without inciting riots, and they're just heroes. You know, our parents were just absolute heroes to do that. And we're thinking about constructing a monument now, which I think hats off to you students and you as a teacher, MichaelPaul. It's incredible. And we were talking, and they're gathering information from everyone to find out what this memorial should be like. And I was trying to get here today, and I got here a little bit late, so I felt a little hesitant to step right up, but they were talking about what it should look like, and they're taking input, and the input that I would have, I mean, they're talking about, you know, the Century Towers, yes, they're talking about, and you know, they said they were putting us in there to protect us. That was one of the reasons. And my father said, "Then why are the guns pointing toward us and not pointing out of the camp?" But, you know, the barbed wire and such, I don't want to forget that. I want it to be a place of beauty too. I want it to be an aesthetic, gentle place where people can sit and think about this and ponder and have discussions, have thoughtful discussions. So it has to have, without all the horror and stirring of this ugly pot, which we mustn't forget it. But I also would say it needs to be a place where people can think about it and think that the Japanese people were resilient and patriotic, and it was a history lesson. And that's what we do. That's why we study history, so that we can learn and go on.
Nancy, your teacher story has to be in your book too.
Another perfect answer to follow. You know, I think when I think about what to carry forward from this history, I think the two things that come to mind are education and empathy. And I think of these two things because I think education, learning about the history is important, as everybody's said so far, that understanding this and making sure that the general public, the people who didn't necessarily have a personal connection to this history knows about it is important. And I think empathy, being able to empathize with people who go through things like this is important. And I always think back to this great story of Norm Mineta, who was Secretary of Transportation just after 9/11. And he went to the camps, he was from San Jose, and he was Secretary of Transportation just after, during 9/11. And there was talk about creating a registry of Muslims in the country and whether or not there should be camps for people of different nationalities from the Middle East. And Norm was in the room with the president at that time. And the president, after discussion, said, you know what, we're not going to do what they did to Norm's family. And so having that level of empathy and being able to really see people as people and not the abstract big policies, but that these are policies that impact families, that impact children, that impact generations, that these have impacts on people that are just like you or me is important. And so that kind of empathy, I think, can really help to prevent something like this from ever happening again.